Hello, and welcome to Supply Chain Workforce of the Future. My name is Elizabeth Rennie. I'm Editor-in-Chief at ASCM, and I am joined by Kent Brown, Practice Leader, Supply Chain COE, Professional Search at Korn Ferry, John Caltagirone, Founding Director, Loyola Business Leadership Hub, and Executive Director of the Supply Chain Value Chain Center at Loyola University, and Abe Ashkenazi, CEO of ASCM, that's the Association for Supply Chain Management. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
So we are talking about the next steps of supply chain workforces and what we should be looking forward to and what we need to prepare ourselves for. So John, I'd like to ask you first, this global pandemic has really underscored the need for rapid business and workforce transformation in order to build resilience. Here at ASCM, we've been talking a lot about the fact that employee health and safety are, of course, essential to this effort and really must come first. So with the well-being of our people solidly in place as the foundation of any response, what are some other key considerations for supply chains as we rebuild with an eye toward resilience?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Beth and Abe and ASCM for giving me the chance to participate in this important webinar. Getting back to normal, maybe we should think about what we can do to make getting back to normal less dangerous. I know that's on top of mind of everybody, whether you're an executive or an entry-level person. There are many diseases, as we know, growing with animals. In fact, the farmers having so much trouble now killing their livestock because the processing meat plants aren't ready for them. We have to be concerned about change in the climate, making conditions warmer. That's not helping. And we need, in my opinion, to use innovation more to help us now. And I feel that should grab the attention of all of us. To come back to be more resilient, sustainable, and we need to be open to a new normal, whatever that is. Some places are resetting their streets, having less cars and more bikes. That may help cities and businesses. What we need to do, maybe that we were thinking about in 2030, we need to start doing now and leverage technology. And I know that's going to come up a little later in our conversation. But we need to come back stronger than ever. We need to look at how is travel affected because of what's going on from safety from that standpoint. And from an education standpoint, I know that's going to come up later too, and I won't say much other than students are staying away from doing things like that. Getting back to the fundamentals, one of the things I always bring up in my courses is there's an important word in front of supply chain, and that word is global. So dealing with the internet, and if you have customers or suppliers in another region of the world, you're global. And the more global we are, there's a lot more opportunity, but with the opportunity goes risk. The risk of natural disasters, the risk of political unrest, the risk of currency, the risk of terrorists, and so on and so forth. So one of the things we need to look at is how are we mapping our supply chain? How are we doing a network optimization? And again, yes, things are different because of the virus, but one of the departments and disciplines I've always admired is information technology. They always have had a backup. If something happened to where their data was, they had a backup for that. I think we have to do a better job from an operations and supply chain standpoint of having a better backup. Now, what do I mean by that? If you go back to 2011 and the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, did we learn anything from that? And I have a client who said, you know, I have nothing to worry about because my suppliers are in China. And I told him, you've got all your eggs in that basket and you do have something to worry about. Well, what happened is companies that were more prominent than his, which is a name company that everybody would recognize, they went to the Chinese suppliers, and guess what? The company, the fellow that I knew, they didn't take care of their product, and they almost went bankrupt and belly up. So what do we learn from that? Well, I talked to an executive over the weekend from Japan who's responsible for North American operation. I says, Craig, why are we reinventing the wheel just because of this coronavirus? And I get it that it's more deadly, literally. He says because it's different from the standpoint that you have all these pop-ups of problems throughout the world. So that's what's different from Sandy and Katrina and what happened in Japan in 2011. And one of the things we need to look at is who are we working with as far as tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers? How strong are they? If something wipes them out, is that going to mess us up? So those are some of the things that we need to look at. And one of the areas that I always care about is people. And I'm not going to get too much into that because we're going to cover that later. Having the right people and the right skill set, processes. Are the processes humming? And can we bounce back? And the technology. And we know what some of the companies are doing today. They're testing for temperature as the employees walk in now. They're making them wear masks. If they can separate them, they're trying to do that as much as possible. But in some cases, I'm not sure if it is possible. So we need to be looking at all those things and still going back to our roots as far as blocking and tackling. And I'm sure everybody who's a fan of ASCM will maybe think I'm talking blasphemy now, but what is JIT helping us? Is Lean helping us? I think there's a case for and against that because of having to build up stockpile and things like that for product. So that in a nutshell is what I want to express. And I think we need to work closer with our suppliers and checkpoints. And that is at least tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers that we need to have a strategic relationship with them.
All right, thank you so much, Sean. Kent, for the next question, as we've all been seeing, remote work is becoming the normal during COVID-19. And many employees and businesses are actually reporting that they're seeing high levels of productivity and other very positive results. So what are some lessons learned from this shift to remote work, from working from home? And how do you think the pandemic might influence the future of workforce strategies?
Well, first of all, I'll take John's lead and thank you both for having me and including Korn Ferry to participate. And what you mentioned is a very important webinar that we're addressing right now. So, you and John certainly spoke to a few skills and behaviors and clear communication practices, decisive decision-making, creativity, along with inclusion is just absolutely critical behaviors for supply chain executives to not only navigate through a crisis, but to John's point, to effectively plan for the future. And I believe the remote and the digital workforce platform is really here to stay. Supply chain executives have been navigating over the past several months through a massive shift towards e-commerce and requiring immediate improvement in their digital platforms and capabilities, which we'll address later as well. But I believe we're going to see a trend towards an even more inclusive and adaptable imagining of creativity towards working from home, even in thinking about potential relocations. And as the digital workforce, it becomes even more pervasive than really ever before in our history. The executives and organizations that do not embrace that evolution very well may be left behind when it comes to attracting executives that are driving results and more progressive thinking organizations, and from a supply chain standpoint, certainly. I believe the more forward-thinking executives and organizations that will be competing with talent with more rigid organizations will really have a significant advantage in this emerging market. This situation specifically will force a mind shift. And think about this. I just personally went through several search processes with candidates and clients through this pandemic. We just closed 2 in the past week where candidates, and these are high-ranking supply chain executives, went through an entire process where they literally did not meet one person physically, not once. Every interview was via Zoom or over the phone. A couple of them will eventually involve relocations at some point, and in one case, the candidate had never even been to that geography before. If you had talked about a scenario like that even 4 months ago, it would have been completely unheard of, and now it's a reality. So even when we return to travel and in-person interviewing and meetings, which I believe we will soon, working digitally and remotely is I believe, here to stay for the majority. And functionally, of course, there will be positions that inherently require in-person or time on the shop floor and that sort of thing, but that may indeed end up being more of the exception than the rule. So again, getting back to, I think, a more forward-thinking mentality and the criticality to push supply chains into being more proactive than reactive from a function standpoint is going to be a clear area of focus moving forward. Korn Ferry just released a pulse survey with many chief supply chain officers participating last week, and that certainly proved to be true. It'll also involve the effective use of advanced data analytics to make decisions rather than tried and true methodologies or gut feelings that may have worked in the past.
All right, thanks so much, Kent. Abe, so far we've talked about the importance of strong leadership with regards to forward thinking, as Ken just said, and also inclusion. We've also learned over these past few months that creative leadership and great communication are necessary. So in addition to this, people first philosophy and the other skills that we've talked about, what specific skills and behaviors will top supply chain executives need in order to meet future targets?
I think this is a rapidly evolving field. I want to piggyback on what Kent and John were pointing out in terms of the transformation that's occurring. It's important to note that this transformation had been occurring for almost 15 to 20 years in the industry. We started to see a significant lift right after 2000, where technology started to have a much bigger role with organizations, specifically with supply chain and the implementation of technological solutions. At that time, technical competency was more than sufficient for supply chain professionals. As long as you understood the technical aspects of whether lean or, as John was pointing out, some of the other methodologies, that was mostly where the focus was on cost efficiencies, on reducing excess capacity, and on being as efficient as possible. That's the price of entry right now for business. Not only on the technical skills, but being economically sustainable is the entry. What we're seeing right now is a much bigger focus on effective communication skills for supply chain professionals moving into leadership positions. And let's not make a mistake here. There is a significant expectation that supply chain professionals will be at the C-level table, helping design and implement the solutions for the organization. So therefore, they need to bring effective communication and collaborative skills to the table. Additionally, one of the areas that organizations have consistently indicated that their candidates lack, and that's critical thinking, the ability to evaluate and recognize the problem situation before implementing a solution. Too often, where we are overweighted was on technology was used as a crutch for irrespective of what the problem was. Let's just apply a technological solution to it. That really did miss a lot of the nuances of real-world experience on how to effectively implement change within an organization. And it's not just technology. Obviously, you need to have a capable workforce along with the process redesign. But individuals that bring that big picture mentality, a macro level view of a supply chain, to John's point, very few supply chains right now do not involve a global aspect to it, whether in raw materials, production, distribution, warehousing. Almost every supply chain has a global nature to it. What that looks like in the future, obviously, is a TBD as we discern and evaluate what is critical to our national security as well as our health and well-being. So that will be evaluated. But when you take a look at the critical, sort of skills, effective communication, critical thinking, big picture, problem solving, those are the types of skills that organizations are looking for from their supply chain professionals. It's interesting to note one of the other areas that corporations consistently ask for is real-world experience. Individuals that have had the opportunity to, evaluate and to see different types of, production and or manufacturing or different supply chains. What's interesting is when you ask a lot of organizations, do you provide internship programs? Do you provide job rotation programs? And where they say no, but yet they expect real world experience without providing the mechanisms for the individuals to gain it. So there has to be a balance between what organizations are looking for, the professional development and opportunities that they allow the individuals to take advantage of, and more importantly, recognizing and rewarding those individuals that do take the step up and prepare themselves for leadership opportunities. I can think of no better time for supply chain professionals than now. We had a tight workforce before we entered this pandemic. Indications are that for every 6 openings, we only had 1 to maybe 2 candidates. So this is a significant opportunity for individuals that prepare themselves appropriately with the technical competency matched with the advanced management skills. I don't like to refer to them as soft skills because there is nothing soft about being a good leader and a good manager.
Great, thank you so much, Abe. John, as Abe was just saying, we have been having an ongoing skills shortage. We're also having a changing skills landscape, of course. This is on the minds of supply chain professionals everywhere. So now, today, with record levels of unemployment, coupled with a real spotlight on the industry, how can we maximize this moment of awareness to close the talent gap? And again, we talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion, but why is D&I so important in this regard?
Well, inclusion and diversity, or diversity and inclusion, is near and dear to my heart. It can play a significant role in an organization and really benefiting that business. And I wanted to make sure that I fully understood what this meant. And I'm going to read you a statement here. Inclusion is a state of being valued, respected, and supported. And that's something every organization should do. It's about focusing on the needs of the individuals, ensuring the right conditions are in place for that person to achieve their full potential. So we really get into some HR issues if we're not doing that. What comes to mind is we should be including everyone, no matter what their color, no matter what their religion, no matter what their sexual orientation is, no matter what it is. And I'd like to refer to, I know sometimes the women are still not treated properly, at least at a minimum for pay, if not getting the right positions. And I still think today we can use the term glass ceiling when it comes to women. I think it's gotten better, but it still has a long way to go. Well, if they have a glass ceiling, an ex-convict has a cement ceiling. And one of the things that I was looking at is from a supply chain standpoint, if you follow my thinking here, you have a person who comes out of the Department of Corrections. And let's say he or she did not commit a murder or something, but it was something much less. Well, shouldn't we give him or her another chance? And who helps with that is the Salvation Army Department of Corrections. And we at Loyola help those men and women with resumes, help them find jobs. They may go to a safe house like an organization called a Safe Haven on the southwest side of Chicago. They might go through detoxing, but they're trained in something. They could be trained in cooking. They could be trained in in landscaping. They could be trained in whatever. And then eventually somebody like Tom Dart in the sheriff's department might bring them over. And then they may go into industry. So I think there's a lot of talent out there that we're not taking advantage of. I also believe that if you have diversity and inclusion in your company, that's going to help you because they're going to see the landscape differently. They're going to have different views, and we need that. It all gets down to culture. And I think people today, they want to work in a culture like that, where everybody is treated fairly, where sustainability is as important also. So those are some of the things that come readily to mind as far as diversity and inclusion, and we should take advantage of it and look to hire those people. I know that at Loyola we have certain guidelines that we're looking to be diverse. We're looking to make sure that we hire the right people and people of color and different religion and all of that stuff. So anyway, I think we can put our money where our mouth is by following that guideline.
All right, thank you so much. Kent, you did tease earlier that we're going to be talking a little bit about digital supply chain. So two big constraints for supply chains today are inadequate technical skills by the workforce, and then employees who don't really have the imagination to make the most of these digital tools. So how can supply chain leaders enhance their operations and their practices in order to address these limitations and then really enable their workforces to make the most of digital supply chain capabilities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad Abe touched on sort of the old world technical aptitude skill set that was needed in the past, because digitization of supply chain has become one of, if not the most critical focus for C-level executives across the board, regardless of where organizations were on that journey prior to the crisis. We saw quite a range prior to COVID, organizations that were maybe theorizing about it, toes in the water, partial integration, to now almost everyone being forced into an en masse digital transformation to some degree. So therefore the need for advanced analytics tools, the proper tools for demand planning, forecasting, risk management has really never been higher. And I believe there will be a sharp focus on integrating strategy and planning, procurement operations, and logistics to reassess and to develop new platforms across all of these supply chain functions. The most obvious way to enhance operations is through the proper utilization of advanced digital platforms, and that's through investment in the right people. Internally, that's where the best leaders will show their true colors, is through events like this, and that's leading the incumbent workforce, motivating, providing the proper training, but also in identifying the critical areas within their own supply chains where bringing in someone from the outside that has gone through a similar evolution and proven themselves perhaps in a more complex and dynamic environment will also be critical. So, the need for talent to drive these efficiencies was paramount before this, but I think, and as we guide through it, will be paramount even more so, no question. So, we look at forward-thinking leaders, and there are several competencies that Abe touched on that come to mind that aren't soft, but in considering these sorts of challenges, and those that tend to be more successful are those that cultivate innovation, possess strong decision-making qualities, are action-oriented, and possess nimble learning skills. And I think that last one is going to be critical throughout this new evolution. But there needs to be a real investment in these tools to properly enable leaders to empower their workforce and to embrace implement effectively. But again, there will be an even greater need to identify and attract executives as well who have effectively maximized these sorts of tools and operational capabilities within world-class supply chains. There's no question.
All right, thank you, Kent. Abe, in order to achieve resilience as we continue emerging from this crisis, every supply chain organization needs people with the right education and training, of course. But what are the top characteristics beyond that hiring managers are looking for in their supply chain candidates? And also, if you were someone who wanted to enter the field, what are some proven methods for gaining these qualities and ultimately succeeding in supply chain?
I think it's as Kent and John pointed out, this is an evolving marketplace for the candidates that are looking for opportunities within supply chain. The criteria for success, as Kent points out, has been elevated, and the investment that organizations have made in technology needs to be matched with the investment in professional development. Just a tool in and of itself without the ability to discern how to evaluate the data results and the analytics doesn't provide much value to an organization. So matching their investment in technology with the investment in talent on an ongoing basis, and this is the concept of walking the talk. I think every employer, if you ask them what their number one asset is, they'll rightfully say their employees. Well, let's take a look at your investment in your number one asset that any supply chain professional would know on asset rationalization is that you pick up your top asset and you invest in that first, not your bottom performing asset to invest in. So if we're true to our word that employees are the number one asset of an organization, then the organization has an obligation to maintain that commitment to those employees, and employees do recognize that. So that's first. Secondly, I think it's important to note that there is not a job in supply chain, that there is no job called supply chain in this marketplace. There are a host of jobs within supply chain. So a way to look at it is similar to engineering. There's no job just called engineer. There are civil, there are architectural, different types of engineers. Similarly, within the supply chain marketplace, there are a lot of career opportunities, which makes it very dynamic. That means you can have a lot of focus areas, whether in planning or logistics or production or sourcing. There are a variety of different roles that you can play and gain the experience to lead effectively an organization. But it's also important to note that with these varieties comes a challenge because there is no one defined career path for an individual that I can't talk to a freshman or a sophomore in college and say, here's the first job that you're going to get, here are the experiences, here are the credentials, and this is how you're going to become a supply chain professional or a supply chain leader or a global supply chain executive. There are different entry points, there are different skills and competencies that they have, but most importantly, going back to Kent's point about pervasive, broad thinking, analytical capabilities to evaluate across an enterprise, knowing your vendors, knowing your customers and your customer's customer or your vendor's vendor, it's a much higher level of expectation for the supply chain professionals. So first, the bar has been raised for supply chain professionals and the competencies that they have to have. Secondly, career paths. We need to invest more in career paths for organizations and, most importantly, be able to explain them to high schoolers and individuals entering college. This is still not a career of choice. 2 months ago, we were explaining supply chain to everybody in the world. Nobody understood what supply chain was. In less than 2 months, we're defending supply chain to everybody in the world and why it hasn't kept up with personal protection equipment or surges and consumer products. We've seen the benefit of supply chain effectively running. We've also seen the fragility of supply chains when we have a disruption. So having individuals with the appropriate knowledge and experience to address these challenges and disruptions, not only to prevent them or avoid them, but also to respond to them, because as John pointing out, we're not going to end up with the same disruption in the near future. It'll be a different type of disruption. We've had tsunamis, we've had recessions, we've had terrorism, we've had cybersecurity challenges. This is another aspect of disruption that will be incorporated into the planning and resiliency and risk mitigation for organizations, and you need to have people with those competencies. Also want to piggyback on a couple of items that John was pointing out in terms of the diversity and inclusion, and specifically on women in supply chain. We just completed our study, the salary survey for our organization, And interestingly, we're seeing parity for hiring of gender diversity. There is no difference between what a starting female versus a male will get in supply chain. The challenge comes is the longer that they stay in the field, the greater the income disparity. So within 5 to 10 years, you're starting to see a 15 to 20% disparity between men and women. Also, the job opportunities that are afforded women are not consistent with the same that they're afforded men. And then you can start to include different types of diversity, as John was pointing out, not just gender, that there are a variety of different categories that we want to pay attention to. Most importantly, this is a job that seeks qualified, competent, and individuals that want to make an impact. Supply chain does make an impact on people's lives. You can see it across the globe, not only in terms of the benefit, but some of the challenges that we've experienced. Median pay for individuals entering the field is exceptional. For an associate's degree, the median income is over $60,000 with an associate's degree. With a bachelor's degree, it's $78,000, and with an advanced management degree, it's over $95,000. They're paying because the individuals contribute to the success of the organization, and those individuals that are credentialed with our certification or other organizational certifications do outperform their counterparts in the marketplace. This is a dynamic field that yearns for individuals that want to make an impact, that want to make a change in people's lives, and yet we're still struggling to find enough individuals that are competent and capable. This is the time to get into supply chain. On the backside of this recovery, and we hope it's sooner than later, the demand for competent and capable supply chain professionals is going to be significant. It was before this pandemic. It will be even more so on the backside of this. The hope is that we'll see this, not only this opportunity, but met with not only baccalaureate programs, advanced management degrees that Loyola provides, but also with certifications that individuals can rapidly gain the competency to prepare themselves for the jobs that are existing today, and more importantly, for the way that they'll evolve in the future.
All right, thank you so much, Abe, and thank you also, John and Kent. We're going to pause for just a moment here, and then we're going to jump into some Q&A. So for our first question today, someone asks, I read a recent article in Forbes that said culture, technology, and process are all links to the physical workspace. So now that so many companies are making remote work a long-term or even a forever solution, what does that mean for these very important aspects of workforce success? And Ken, I was going to ask you to answer that one.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one, again, that Abe pointed out in his last comments, that the situation is fluid, and it's still evolving as we speak. It's a week-to-week, day-to-day type of thing. But ultimately, I just think that there has to be a new way to define culture, and we define that. We define that as organizations, as people within those organizations and leaders within these organizations. I think the organizations that are really going to have to address that first are going to be those organizations that rely on its office, the office culture environment. There's no question that the leadership within those types of organizations are going to have to address that. But but while the script is still being written, the good news there is that I think that we were already seeing a trend towards more virtual work from anywhere attitude. Certainly not everywhere, but there were organizations trending in that direction. So, but I think that there are some successful templates to pull from there, especially in technology and other sectors that have been toying around with those sorts of ideas before the crisis hit. But technology and process, absolutely critical in thinking about how to drive culture, again, even more so now than probably before all of this, and having and defining, not only being successful in a virtual platform, but the people element, the connectivity, the communication, and motivating others is going to be an interesting challenge. But again, the supply chain executives that will see the most success are those that thrive on those sorts of new challenges, dealing in ambiguity, and driving results amidst complex and fluid situations.
All right, thank you so much. Another question we have. Many experts are saying the future of business leadership is going to shift from politics and hierarchy toward more of leadership by influence. So Abe, what does this mean for supply chain professionals at every level of the business, whether a leader or member of the workforce?
Yeah, I think this has become a hallmark of supply chain professionals and those entering the field right now is having visibility and transparency within the supply chain. And to do so, you need to have the appropriate mechanisms as well as the appropriate communication channels for your vendors. And as John was pointing out, it's just not tier one. It extends all the way to the raw materials and or the production of product for the consumer and or the patient. So we have to take a long view in terms of the players that are within your supply chain. And it's important to note that very few supply chains are identical. So we're looking at a very diverse marketplace, even within industries. The same industry, you're seeing different types of supply chains. So a significant focus will be placed on after action items in terms of this pandemic and what we've done right, what we've done wrong, and what we can do differently. Obviously, with any risk mitigation or resiliency strategy, the first is to avoid the disruption. So if at all costs to have it bypass your organization or your workforce. Secondly, if you are unable to avoid it, is to respond to it. That you need to be able to have the appropriate scenarios in place so that you can make the necessary decisions within the organization as opposed to being a knee-jerk reaction to the changes in the marketplace. Lastly, recovering. Having the ability to recover quickly and rapidly from the disruption. And as Kent was pointing out, digital transformation will enable an organization to succeed and to get back onto their feet much quicker than those that are not digitally based. But also we have to take a look at this particular challenge that we've had with the pandemic. If you compare it to the recession that we experienced back in 08-09, that was a drop in demand across the various industries. This is not a drop in demand right now. This is a function on the supply side that's impacted our supply chains today. The inability to maintain our supplies with the surge as well as the higher demand and a shift in utilization for products, whether it be food or other items that consumers are now using in the house as opposed to work or in education or in a conference setting. So a lot of the rules have changed, and it still is to be determined what real demand looks like in those settings. So when you start to see the actual shift in demand as well as support for those organizations and for the marketplace, you'll see that supply chain will protect our economy. Healthcare is going to protect our well-being and make sure that we're appropriate and that we can enter our workplaces in a safe and healthy manner. Supply chain has the ability to get our economies back running. It's important to note we were at peak capacity right before this recession. Unemployment was at historic lows. If you wanted a job, it was more than ample opportunities for individuals to get a job. In less than 2 months, the entire marketplace has turned upside down on unemployment and on the level of impact that it has. But it's also important to note, and I'm going to go back to what John was saying, on a global nature of supply chains, I think you'll see a public-private conversation about national security on products and services that perhaps we didn't have before. Where it may have been just personal protection equipment, I think you'll see some discussion about agility and capacity to respond to surges in demand in our marketplace. And that may mean that we take a look at the raw materials and instead of sourcing from a international market, that you source from a domestic market. But those have implications for trade. If you're going to start to pull back on certain aspects of trade with other countries, they may take retaliatory actions against your, what would benefit your economy. So I think we're going to see a shift, but I think it's also important that we have a public-private discussion about where the investment is going to come from for redundancy, for agility, and responsiveness to surges that we know are going to happen in the future. We just don't know where and how and the extent that they're going to happen in the future. but supply chain professionals are now taking a much bigger role and a much more pervasive role in terms of the impact to their organizations in every aspect, from the raw materials all the way through waste recycling and hopefully a circular economy type concept that most organizations should embrace. The sustainability of organizations and the decisions that are made need to have a long-run view. This is not just about an economic recovery. This is about an environmental recovery as well as an ethical recovery. It's important that as supply chain professionals are making decisions about how organizations and how their particular companies respond, that they take a long-term view, albeit with a very short-term devastating impact, to ensure that whatever recovery that they invest in is sustainable from an economic, from an environmental, as well as an ethical practice.
All right, thank you so much, Abe, and thank you again, John and Kent. Thanks to everyone who's watching Supply Chain Workforce of the Future.